guys, thank you for joining this session of the London PWA Meetup. And this is our first session with a rebrand. So some of you may be remembering our meetup from last year. So we did a few sessions in 2016, and it was called London Polymer Meetup at the time. And we decided to change the name and change the focus for it because we want to make sure we push for the technology, and we make sure we recognize the importance of the web platform as a whole. And our philosophy with us is that we want to make sure the developers and the web developers, they use as much as the browser API as possible and as little external libraries as possible. So that's why we decided to migrate from a Polymer approach to a more generic and more general web platform approach. So in this meetup, you're going to be hearing some case studies about what the Toaster developers, and soon enough you're going to invite third-party developers as well. And you can see the challenges that we have encountered, especially in terms of like offline support, notification, and like having like a full, reliable and stable platform that is good for everyone on the web. And also we want to provide a space for providing with workshop, and there will be like a QA session at the end of the evening. And we want to provide a space for networking with all of us. I'm sure we are friendly, so may come to speak with us, and we want to foster like a very positive environment around the web. And at the same time, we want to give back as a company. We want to collaborate and get the best for all. A little word about Toaster. So you can visit our website, which is toaster.co. We are a digital creative agency with a focus on branding, marketing campaigns, but also we have like quite a bit of production arm, and we focus on web application and websites. We are a preferred partner for Google, and at the moment we have a team of 20 to 25 developers across the world. So we have offices in San Francisco, in London, in India, and in Singapore. And we are quite lucky because being a Google vendor, we can focus on the bleeding edge stage of the platform. And we still have to support IE, obviously, but only IE 11. So that's the good part. And the focus of our stack at the moment is Polymer with Node for the building tools and the tooling in general, Python and App Engine, and all that goes around it. And we do like big campaigns for Google, and those campaigns, they have like a big impact. Our website, they have like many millions of visitors every year. And also we work on brand hack, which is a concept where we try to develop a concept very quickly for a pitch or for an MVP for a client, and we work that way across the world very quickly. And I think that's it. So that was just a quick introduction, and now go on into the speakers. So I'm Alberto, I'm head of development at Toaster, and Davy is tech lead at Toaster, and he's going to be the moderator of the night.
So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, especially because it's raining. It's quite nice. It's awesome to see so many of you. So the idea is we want to try and get your feedback as well. Exactly what you think of the meetup, what you think to change, what you'd like to see, like anything specifically on PWA that you're quite into and stuff. Like straight away, I totally love service workers. So anything like that, I'm saying that we haven't got a service worker talk tonight, but you know, that'll come in the future. So we can talk about, to what Alberto was saying, like some of the things now because we're not specifically a Polymer meetup, we can talk about IndexedDB, React, Angular, all those kind of good stuff. So if there's anything particular that anyone wants to hear about, or even that you want to talk about yourself, come and speak to me afterwards. and we'll try and get that in. If you want to talk, or if you've just got an idea for a talk, let me know. We'll try and get something up there. So I think, so the idea for tonight is we've got 3 talks. So we're going to have this guy. So this guy is called Johnny. He's front-end dev at Toaster, and he's going to have a talk about one of the PWAs that's currently out in the wild.
Yeah.
So I suppose first of all, just to try and get a feel of like, has anyone been building PWAs? Can I get a show of hands? Oh yeah, we got a couple people. Nice. Maybe I should say, does anyone know what PWA is? But I'm guessing if you're at the venue, you probably already know it. Have you? Did you put your hand up that time?
No, I didn't. No.
Nice. Alright, so in that case, I'm going to hand straight over to you, Johnny. Here's, let's show you, show us Odyssey.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Woo! Can we get a big hand for John?
Thank you. I simply cannot present without applause. So I'm Johnny. I have been working on this kind of in my own time. And I wanted to show it off because it's kind of a good example of a PWA, which is a progressive web app for anyone else who doesn't know. And it's kind of like, just as a bit of an introduction, it's quite clever branding, I guess, is kind of a buzzword that you can latch onto. But really, a PWA is a website, which I'm sure you know of. But it kind of uses things that kind of allow you to get a bit closer to the metal, allow you to make them feel a bit more native, so that the web kind of feels more like a first-party app. So yeah, I wanted to show off this one as I think it's an okay example of that. So it's very simple. It's this is essentially the flow you'd go through. You have the home screen, new, and I will explain what the app is, don't worry. So you go new, you get a webcam feed with some options, and then at the end, it generates a picture that you can download and start over again. It's really not too hard. But what it is it's an app to kind of simulate a slit scan effect, which is like an effect with cameras with rolling shutters, so that when a camera takes a picture, it actually kind of takes it from the top down. And if you have something that's fast enough that actually beats that shutter speed, it kind of looks like it's 2 places in one time, and it's kind of a really warpy effect. And this is just like a digital kind of replica of it. But this is like kind of some of the examples you can get from the app that I've made. Kind of weird effects, really kind of like warping effects. So that is what it is, and I'll show it at the end as well. But what I wanted to talk about is obviously the PWA aspect of it and what's nice about it, and kind of introduce some of the ideas that are very core to progressive web apps in general. There'll be things that if you're interested in it, they'll come up more and more. Certain words you'll see often, yada, yada, yada. So the app itself, like you saw, it was really simple. It has persistent database of images that's just on your phone, so you can see all the existing ones you made. It renders GIFs client side. You download the images from the browser, and you can launch it from your home screen. So these are all things that are cool, but they're like expected in a way. You'd expect a native app to do this. It's nothing new for a device, but it's cool that you can sort of expect websites to maybe do this going forward. They're things that no longer you have to build apps to get these same ideas. So one of the cool things about it is that because it's basically a webcam and then generating something on the client side, stores everything on the client side, there's kind of no real reason for a backend to it. There is no backend to it. And one of the nice things about that is that it doesn't actually really need any network requests. Then as soon as you've loaded the files, it can work from then on offline. Which is kind of able to be produced through Service Worker, which is the introduction to the first kind of buzzwordy thing. And Service Worker is a new technology for the web platform, which kind of allows you to access a lot of APIs. One of them being that you can talk to the caches API through Service Worker, and you can store files that you download for the website. You can store them for offline usage, so they stay in the caches API. So the next time that I hit this site, I'll have instant loading of my style sheets. I'll have instant loading of my JavaScript, and even if I lose connection, I will still have the loading of those things. So this app works completely fine offline because there's no need to have a backend for it. And Service Worker is really powerful because, like I say, it's a platform that allows you to interact with a lot of APIs. It doesn't use it with this one, but you can have push notifications, which I think is something that feels very native. There's a thing called background sync, which allows you to the kind of neat features of like apps where you don't have a connection, but you might post a tweet, and then later it will make sure that gets posted when you regain connection. Background sync can allow that. And there's loads more being developed for it. So the one preconception that I wanted to kind of get past is that Service Worker is not a scary technology in the slightest. I kind of thought it was, just because it seems new. The vanilla code itself of writing a Service Worker isn't that bad at all, but the reality of it is, with a lot of things, is that you would probably create your Service Worker with a build tool. And to kind of gauge the idea of things, do people use like build tools in their work, like Gulp or Webpack, Grunt or anything like that? Yeah, it's kind of nod head sort of thing. There was really powerful ones, SW Precache and SW, I don't know what the other component was. SW Precache and... Yeah, so basically, it doesn't matter about that. Workbox is something that's kind of come out of Google and other people, and it supersedes it, and it's kind of a really good toolbox to create your service workers. So this is my rundown for this little web app. This config file snaps into my build chain. I give it globs of the files that I want it to cache. I'm even doing runtime caching, which is very cool. So even the Google fonts are stored for offline. And that's like as simple as it can get for doing runtime caching as well. And yeah, cache ID, file name, it's kind of self-explanatory. And then when that gets built, this is all you have to do, or all I'm doing anyway, inside my code to install a service worker. Kind of a sanity check to see if it exists in Navigator. If it does, register the file. The if registration active is like if it is installed. You can do something off the back of that. Some people put their like little pop-ups that say this site is ready for offline use. And then on update found is kind of a nice method for if there's a new service worker and it's made the old files kind of stale and it's updated. You can then display something saying please like refresh to get the newest files. So yeah, between those two things, between the build config and that, it's crazy like the benefits you get from something so vanilla. I'm using it in really like vanilla way. So yeah, that's service worker, and yeah, I've only touched on how impressive it is. But one of the other things is a manifest, which you can you bundle with your app. It's just a JSON file at the top level. That's all it is. But it kind of gives some indications to things. It gives a name, gives a short name, a color. It's kind of some of the things that you would do in the meta tags already. But the thing about having this manifest JSON present is that you can you define the start URL as well, and this allows the saving of the app to the home screen on a device on Android. I don't really know what it does on iOS, but anyway, like these things are going to get pushed further and further. I know that service work is kind of a weird topic with Apple at the minute, but anyway. So yeah, this little manifest JSON allows it to, this is my phone, so I've got, kind of a first-class citizen. It's got an icon, it's got a name, has like a startup screen, launch from the home screen. You don't have to touch Chrome. It's using Chrome under the hood, but do your users have to care about that? No. So yeah, that's very cool. And the last thing that I wanted to kind of speak about is this tool called Lighthouse. And it was a Chrome extension, but now it's like going to be baked into the new Chrome. There's in the audits, you can run a Lighthouse audit, and it's something that can help you with your progressive web apps. If you run it, it'll do a lot of tests, and it'll tell you where to improve, you know, file size, all this kind of stuff you hope for, but then it will also debug your manifest JSON, it will debug your service worker stuff, it'll, you know, it's really like specific for progressive web apps and the rest of your site. And this is the score that I got. So I mean, I don't want to brag, but I got 100 on progressive web app performance, accessibility, and best practices 100. But the cool thing is that really, like, Lighthouse is just well, in fact, what I want to say is that there's nothing wrong with using Lighthouse as like a checklist. It's actually a very good thing to do. Like, I don't know why I want to mention this, but like, it feels like I'm gaming the system when I see like a red cross and I go like, well, I'll just fix that. And then it goes to the green tick. I'm like, cool. Like, it feels like I'm gaming it, but really it's just like a list of best practices. So it's a very, very useful tool to do. And like I say, when it comes baked in with Chrome, that'll be handy as well. Yeah, that felt kind of lightning, but that is my talk finished. But I wanted to show you just the app in situ as well. So I'm going to show you the desktop version just because I could not figure out how to do the screen mirroring of my device. But so this is it, and like I say, really simple. I mean, there you go. That's me. This is not pre-recorded. Few options. So I'll make it nice with a little border, and then when I record, okay. So,
See your training.
yeah, this is my Herbal Essence. This is like Herbal Essence's audition tape. So yeah, and that, I mean, that's all there is to it. So yeah, you can see the existing ones. Like I say, it's using PouchDB to store them. So,
we got them.
do you want to?
Yeah. I'm in it.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of still work in progress, but that is it at the minute. It's that URL. So if anyone wanted to use it, there you go.
Nice. Look at that.
Yeah. Cheers.
So before you sit down, Jen, has anyone got any? Actually, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moderator's prerogative.
Yeah.
What's the step? What did you build it in? What's it hosted on?
So it's hosted on App Engine. I don't know if that's interesting. I use React for it. I use Webpack for the build chain, which is really good.
Disagree.
Yeah. I don't know what. Sorry, I don't really know what else to say. Yeah, that's all it is.
I was surprised it was in React, actually.
Yeah. We use Polymer every day at work, and I use React every single project I do in my own time. So.
Every night.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you say about service workers? Like, I totally on board with service workers.
There's a whole talk in service worker, to be honest. Yeah.
So, for you, what was the best aspect of service workers?
Just the fact that honestly, like, because there's no need for the back end, it's awesome that I don't have to care about connection. There's nothing that I'm waiting on. There's no fetch I'm waiting on. There's no network requests I'm waiting on. It just works exactly how it's meant to every time.
Yeah.
So.
No, I love that, especially the second time you come as well. Everything's like stupidly instant.
Yeah.
It's like just clicking on a link, boom, and your whole site is there instantly working. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I recommend everyone implement service worker. Cool, man. Anyone else got any questions? Get back.
I did have one, it's a bit of a simple one actually.
Yeah.
The code example you showed with the load and service workers, I guess that's like kind of extra 6 styles and that.
Yeah, there's so like a bunch with like the same with kind of like because service workers in the service worker codes it uses like the kind of fetch model because everything's promises. It's like a lot of things are moving towards like using the ES6 style things.
What's support like for that? I mean,
For ES6 at this point,
Service workers is going to support ES6.
I guess so. Yeah. That's
Can you compile it with Babel down to ES5?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason why this shouldn't be anything. To be honest, there's yeah. It's just I wanted to show off, guys. Yeah, no.
Should have used async and await.
Yeah. There's no reason. There's nothing special going on.
Well, anyone?
What exactly was the build tool? Like, you said you like rather than writing all the service workers.
Sorry. Yeah. So I jumped over that a bit. So.
Question us?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So what was the kind of thing the plugin, I guess, that goes into the build tool in a way? Because so this is just a Webpack plugin. And the one that I'm using is called SW Precache, which was made by people from Google or whatever, and it kind of just abstracts a lot of the code that you have to write for the service worker itself. But there's, the one that I should say is that the one they've kind of, I'm not sure if they've deprecated it, but they've moved into one called Workbox, and Workbox is like the new one, and it does have new features as well. It's really all encompassing. Like this, things like this where I'm doing the runtime caching. I spoke kind of briefly about Service Worker and how it does its caching and things like that, but there's a lot of cache models. So it's like you can do network first, you can do cache first, you can do, I don't know, mix of the two. So you can race them. And so Workbox helps you with a lot of those things. You can, I think you can define on a pattern level which you want to be, network first. So if it's data, you probably want it to be network return first. And if that fails, go to the cache. But then, style sheets, they may as well be cache first. And then if they're stale, they update them. So Workbox. Anyway, long story short, Workbox.
What does this do at its basic level then? Just gets a list of all your files that you use?
Because it's running through the build tool already, so it gets the actual files, and it kind of makes this just array of files that it deems as like a pre-cache.
So I've got an index file, JavaScript file, CSS file, and 2 images.
Yeah.
It just puts those into an array and sticks them into the service worker.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this, when you do the vanilla service worker stuff, you have to deal with the invalidating of previous caches. But this will make sure that each build, if it's changed, their new IDs and they invalidate themselves.
Automatically hashes all the requests.
Yeah, so it takes a lot of the pain out of that side of stuff.
Oh.
Yeah, if you're interested in all these recipes for service workers, you should definitely check out Jake Archibald's website. He has a blog post which dates more or less to a year and a half ago, where it goes through all the different combinations of strategies for caching with service worker.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Any more questions?
Sorry, just what was the name of that website?
Workbox.
No.
Sorry.
Jake Archibald. Yeah.
Jake Archibald.
What his website is?
JakeArchibald.com maybe, I don't know. He's Jaffa the Cake on Twitter. You can kind of trace him down.
It's one of the most popular and
He's a co-author of the service worker spec anyway. You'll find him easily. Yeah. You can search for the service worker cookbook. You should be able to find it.
Thank you.
More of a general thing. So how do you interpret files?
So how?
You do some changes on your code, right? How do you push that out to your users?
So
cache invalidation on service worker.
So the cache invalidation stuff is with these plugins is based on like hashes of the files, but the actual invalidation, I'm gonna guess of what you're saying, like on the front end, how do people get the new files? So that's what this this on update found. I kind of felt a bit weird about it at the start, because basically Service Worker always works for the second load, because when you load it just like a normal site, and then once it's loaded, you get the benefits the second time, because Service Worker has installed itself and it's done the thing. It's kind of the same with the new versions of Service Worker as well. So when you have new files and things like that, if someone comes back to your site and your caching strategy is cache first, they will get the old files. But on update found will understand that there's a new service worker. So then it's kind of up to you as the front end person to display a message almost and say, hey, there's a new service worker, there's new files, could you refresh the page? Like, I'm not sure if people have seen it on some sites now where it's like, refresh, there's new content. That's probably because their service worker is updated.
Email has that little toast. Inbox.
Inbox has it,
has a little toast that comes up at the bottom.
So basically, the service worker is detected to be kind of a new version when the browser basically does a byte size, like a byte diff, and that's why also it's very important to set the right cache control headers on your service worker file. But basically, if the service worker is different from the previous one, depending on the settings, most of the time service worker will just kind of install and wait for the next page reload to actually take place and become active. You can also skip waiting as an option, and you're kind of forcing the new service worker to take place of the old one, and you kind of skip one page load. But usually what you want to do is to just have the new service worker getting read in the background and then notify the user, and basically the page reload should be just triggered by the user. Yeah.
Cool. I think there's one more question. We're all good? Yeah.
How do you do the effect?
It's like this. I need to work on it because it's so intensive. It keeps crashing my phone all the time. But it's like nothing too smart. It just stores each array. It stores each frame going down, and then sort of offsets them as slits. So you're just looking at old frames. And then they cycle down and keep going down, keep going down. So there's a hidden canvas which has got the current frame always, and it's just pushing that into a frames array. And I just use the sliver out of all of them.
So you're keeping like 256 frames every time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, it's like so weird. My phone like does weird things I've never seen it do before.
Debug your app in real time.
Yeah. To be honest, how do I debug that? I don't know how to get better at that, but anyway.
Just crashes. Yeah.
Well, we've got QA coming up at the end where everyone can talk.
Yeah. Well,
speakers.
Johnny will explain how to debug the memory.
I'll ask everyone else how to fix it.
Cool. Thanks very much, Johnny.
Yeah. Nice.
So now we've got Mr. Marco Ciampini. He's the senior developer over at Toaster. He's going to have a talk about AMP. Now, AMP is something that kind of went a bit under my radar. I didn't really see that much of it. I saw Facebook's instant, is it instant pages or instant articles?
Instant.
And I was kind of massively against it. Yeah. But then AMP came along and accelerated mobile pages. That's AMP. Anyone use AMP? Exactly. Oh,
perfect.
Hey, we got like 2 people there. I totally didn't expect that. Huge turn. Yeah. 2 people using AMP. That's mind blowing. So yeah, without further ado, can I get a big clap for Marco? Thank you.
So to the ones that who didn't raise their hands, I was one of you until 2 months ago. And this talk is basically the journey that me and Will went through when we were assigned this project. This project is particularly interesting because the brief was a bit different. The perception that in the developers community we have about AMP is a technology that really is focused on content-driven websites, mainly news websites, something that has a very boring layout mainly and has to load fast because the only thing that matters is for the user to read that piece of news very quickly and then go back. They want to change the perception of this, and that's why we were briefed with a different approach. They want now to demonstrate that AMP can actually be used to develop a bespoke design. And they wanted us to push the boundaries of the capabilities of AMP. And also they warned us that this would be a template that every developer could look at. And so we also had to be not just pushing the boundaries of AMP, but also not too hacky at the same time, which was very difficult. I'm just going to go really quickly through the brief. So I'm going to make this really like the journey that we went through. This is the homepage. These are actually 2 sections that sit on top of each other. And we were asked actually for a very cool linear wipe effect, a sort of mask between these 2 sections. We pushed back on it straight away because we thought it wouldn't be possible given the limitations of AMP. But basically, the website is a template that is about a chair. It comes in white and black. Really looks beautiful. There are 2 detailed pages for the product. They mirror each other, so they're basically the same identical page, just with different themes and different imageries. The page is actually scrolled down, and the bottom section of the page, you have some sort of CTAs buttons, like this one here, and they open an overlay. And also you have these other kind of CTA buttons, and there's a black version in there. And they were supposed to transition between the 2 pages with a sort of circled mask effect. These are the overlays, and they would just open on the pages, on top of the product pages. And the last page is a store page, which doesn't really link anywhere because it's all fake. So what is AMP? So we were given the brief and we had to go through the documentation and really understand what we had to deal with. AMP is made of 3 main pieces of technology. We have the HTML bit, which is enhancing, extending the HTML, the web normal HTML APIs through custom properties and custom tags. We have the JavaScript bit, which is the core library, and also ensures like the best performance practices that we have nowadays in web technologies. Mainly downloading in an asynchronous way all the external resources. In this way, avoiding all the render blocking requests. Another big thing is enforcing static layouts, which means that every single node in the page that actually takes some space has a fixed dimension, and the JavaScript library knows its dimension, so things don't jump when they get loaded in the page later on. And also all the rendering cycles are batched, so the page is quite smooth. The third bit is the AMP cache, which is basically a CDN that actually is used to download and holds all the resources. It's based on HTTP2, so it's very fast and very distributed. And it validates also all documents, so you are sure that if you can get an AMP document, it's perfectly valid and it will run without any error. And also the library is shared on the AMP cache, which means that if you look at a website that uses AMP and then you load another page, roughly like 50 to 60% of the bytes that you need to download to see that page are actually cached already from the previous visit. The validator is what makes AMP very strict. There is a set of must-have features, which are mainly expressed in terms of what HTML tags you have to include in your page. And then there's a set of disallowed features, which are the worst bit of AMP to a developer. So you can't use any third-party JavaScript. We can't code in JavaScript in AMP unless we put this JavaScript code in an iframe. CSS has to be inlined and has to be below the 50 kilobytes threshold per page. Animations and transitions have to change only transform and opacity properties. And you can't use an import and you can't use a filter. All the media HTML tags are not allowed because you have to use the AMP custom tags, which take care of polyfilling some features and loading asynchronously the media objects. And this was us when we read that. And we're already deep into the project, so we couldn't really opt out. So we went through the AMP components list. There are mainly 6 groups. We're going to focus on 4 of them. We're not going to really care about ads and analytics and the social. So what we did was going through the list of all the components and try to kind of guess the ones that would be interesting to us. Unbind is recent and is really useful because it basically allows the developer to write some sort of JavaScript-like code in HTML and listen to certain user-triggered events and in response trigger other stuff like changing classes or toggling a slide in a carousel, something like that. So that's definitely very powerful. If you're ever going to do something in AMP, that's your friend. List kind of displays some data in list. Selector basically chooses. It's a sort of powerful radio button. There's a lot of them, so I'm going to quickly through them. The sidebar is very useful, of course. It's like the classic like menu hidden on the side of the window. There's a few effects, like the parallax one. There's an accordion, which is basically collapsed content that can be expanded. There's a flying carpet. We didn't know what it was. So the flying carpet is actually this effect here, which is a sort of reverse parallax, where you have a sort of peering window in the page and you see through on a fixed background. There's, as I said before, all the counterparts of the media elements in HTML. So you have AMP image, AMP video, AMP audio, AMP anim is for displaying GIFs. And then you have presentational elements. You have AMP animation, which is a good friend of AMP bind. So that's what you use in combination with. Dynamic CSS classes, AMP font, fit text is trying to kind of change the font size given the space, the state where the paragraph sits into. And so with all these elements, we were ready to push AMP boundaries. These are a few use cases that we came across during our project. So this is a failure. Page transitions. We really wanted to achieve page transitions in the site. We had as a request to fulfill just normal fading between the pages. We needed to support overlays, so basically fading to another page while keeping the original page in the background to give some context, and also the blank to noir, like the white to black kind of radial wipe. So we had the first working draft that uses fragment URLs, so the hashtag in the URL and the CSS target pseudo element. And that worked fairly well, but then we came across a blocker bug, which basically meant that our images couldn't really display. So either they didn't load at all, or they all loaded at once, which defeated the whole purpose of being performant and using AMP. And also we had a few problems with restoring the scroll position of the page and navigating back and forth with the history. So basically we ended up just using a multi-page static site approach, and we were just having animations on page load, which basically it's very quick. See, this is more or less like, it's really nice and subtle and works well, but we don't have any transition between pages, basically. And that made us understand that AMP requires a different mindset. It has to be a static site. We also really briefly considered using a new strategy called progressive web AMPs, which the AMP team is talking about these, like, it's maybe in the last month or so. Which I won't talk about because it's a completely different topic. But if you're interested, we can discuss about it later. Then we had also to deal with some scroll bound effect. Some sort of like classic revealing header. So when you scroll up, it comes into view. When you scroll down, it goes away. Fading content in as you scroll through it. The chair that you saw in the designs is supposed to rotate a bit like the Mac Pro website as you scroll down. We have like chapter names that are kind of vertical text on the side, and they wanted them to kind of stick to the middle of the page and just update as you scroll through the page. And then a lot of parallax and flying carpet effects. And all of these are actually not in our template at the moment because the AMP team is working on the scroll bound AMP animation right now. This is a pull request that tracks it. And we already collaborated with the AMP team on an early version of it, and we gave some feedback, but at the moment it's not ready yet. Another aspect of the site, and something that really helped us to push the boundaries of what an AMP site can look like, is the bespoke typography. So our website is really bespoke in terms of typography, as I was saying. This is the store page. It's a very simple page. But if you notice, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different blocks of text. Each one of them has a different combination of font weights, font size, letter spacing, line height. And this really contributes to the site to feel bespoke and to feel very curated. So it's definitely, if you ever need to work on an AMP site, it's definitely a weapon that you want to use to your own advantage. Also, we used a lot of layering and in combination with position absolute, fixed and relative, which may sound like I don't know, 90s advice, but it's really effective. There's nothing too fancy here, but it looks really nice, I think. And it contributes to, the feeling of having to deal with a very bespoke site. Even if there isn't a single line of JavaScript, the scroll is native within the browser. It just looks really good, I think. This is something we are really proud of. This is the linear wipe. This is coming from the designer. And as I said at the beginning, we pushed back almost immediately on this feature. And I think this is a perfect example of what the project taught me and Will on working on it, which is basically we were really limited by the technology and we had to find a way to do something. Basically, when we pushed back, the designer said, no, this has to be there. This is the killer feature of this template. It's the homepage, it has to be there. And so we basically thought about a way of achieving this. And fairly late at night, one night, I came across ClickPath and I thought, okay, maybe it can work with position fixed. Then I came across a few bugs with pointer events, but then I made it work. And then after a few days of, improving it, it actually works. And it's also very cool because it uses the @supports CSS feature detection. So if the browser supports it, you have the linear wipe. If the browser doesn't support it, you just have a kind of less cool effect, which doesn't really affect the usability of the page. And then I wanted to go through some considerations, some practical bits of advice. So, because of the limitations of the AMP validator, you have very few kilobytes allowed for your CSS. You should definitely use a utility library. Our template is going to sit on AMP start, and they use base CSS or bus CSS, I don't know. And it's basically just a utility function, an utility CSS library, where you have classes that do one really small thing, and you end up with your HTML that is full of really simple classes like absolute, top, zero, underline. We really advise you to read docs carefully because they are really full of good information and you can't find it really anywhere else. It's not like I know the web, I can do AMP, because you need to step back and rethink a lot about the way you're working. Which is also related to the fact that you should know the limitations of AMP before committing to a design. And also you should be ready to make amends to design as you actually develop. So you should be basically ready to have a very flexible and fast-paced cycle of amends. If you find bugs and you have a feature request, you should do that. You should flag that immediately to the AMP team, because these days they tend to be very reactive and they tend to answer to you. They're really interested in improving their platform, and so the chances are that by the time that if you flag that early enough in the roadmap of the project, by the end of it, it's going to be either solved as a bug or implemented as a feature. You have to be creative. You have to look at the components. If you see AMP accordion, you don't have to think of it just as an accordion, but you have to think of it as something that can expand and collapse. So I've seen other teams using it for drop-downs menus, even if it's called AMP accordion. Or if you see an AMP carousel, you could as well just make it full bleed and use it for full page transitions, for example. And then again, you have to think with a static site-like approach. Otherwise, if you have features that are more API-like, you should definitely consider implementing a PW progressive web AMP. which is kind of mental as an acronym, but anyway, I didn't come up with it. There's a bit of useful resources. So ampproject.org is the main website, is the headquarters of the project, where you find all the documentation as well. Ampstar.com is where all the templates sit, and also our template is going to sit by the end of August, I think. So you can find it, you can file bugs and everything. Amp by example is very useful again, because it's where all the code snippets are. And there are also live samples, so you can play around with the code and see how things work before you actually download the code and make it run in your browser. And then they have a YouTube channel, which is actually quite useful. They have all the footage from a conference that they had roughly 4 months ago, so it's quite up to date. For example, in that conference, they were announcing AMP bind and the scroll bound animation as work in progress, and now AMP bind has landed and the scroll bound animation is about to land. And also they have a lot of showcases, and they have a few tutorials on all the stuff that we touched in the presentation. And then there's my personal pros and cons and set of slides. Pros, definitely the main pro and the main reason why AMP exists is because it's 100% focused on the performance. And it looks really limiting. But actually most of the limitations can be avoided, or at least overcome. Another pro is that AMP as a library is really growing, and even us working on the project, in the span of 2 months, we saw a lot of features popping up. So it's really alive right now and growing fast, being maintained by a good team of developers. And I think if I had to advise a company or a developer, I think it's the perfect fit for a company that doesn't have a lot of expertise in building a very fast site or enough budget to build a very fast site. With AMP you can achieve a lot of performances. Like, you have to achieve the performances, otherwise it's not a valid AMP site. So you're obliged. My cons are, basically that's like a sort of political point, the first one. So AMP is against publication independence. So it's, of course, we know that it's a project by Google, and it kind of legitimates all the content that is on its platform. So in a way, it kind of allows more fake news. And also, it traps the user in a portal where if the user goes back, it's going to go back to Google and not back to the actual site. This can be kind of avoided if you use progressive web AMPs, because any link is going to open in your PWA. So the AMP page is going to be like the first step into your PWA. But otherwise, as of now, it's basically a portal for Google search. On the developer point of view, like as the developer experience working on this site, it was very frustrating, because you're not allowed a lot of things, and the things that you're allowed to do, sometimes they clash or they just don't work. We received a very good design, and we felt very frustrated not being able to achieve some parts of it, not being able to deliver something, not because of us not being able to, but because of the technology. It kind of went against all the best practices that we learned, like not using a ton, like 2,000 classes to describe an element or other things. And I believe that if you are a good web developer, you can be informed and you can use a lot of the modern web technologies and achieve very good performances without using AMP. So those are my pros and cons, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
This is the site live.
Let's see how it goes. Like, do the slide.
So it does that, and it's quite cool.
So I can't express how ambitious the requirements were for this site. I say ambitious, like outrageous, really. There's like parallax running, side scrolling with 3D spinning animation and magic carpet effects. I've never heard that until I've seen this. But
It's flying carpet, that's why.
flying carpet. I prefer the magic carpet effect. So it was impressive how many things you managed to actually get in here. It's pretty nice, and it is super fast, like an AMP site should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an incognito window, by the way.
So is this actually on the AmpStart website now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
It is in the AmpStart repository
so
right now.
If you're on GitHub, you can pull down the pull request, then you can actually run this locally and have your little fun with AMP. So, anyone got any questions about AMP and everything that you've talked about? Anyone?
Does it work on every browser?
So
It works on all the evergreen browsers, for sure. Even though we noticed that they advise using some APIs that are not supported across all browsers. For example, this is something that I didn't mention in the presentation, but for example, AMP image, there is a whole system for kind of scaling assets, scaling media. And it works, you can either specify a fixed size or you can set it in terms of ratio. So you can say this image is 1.8 to 1. And then the AMP library is going to scale the image according to the wrapper's width. But then you cannot do the same according to the wrapper's height. And so they advise to use object fit for resizing the image, and that completely breaks it in Edge and any other browser that doesn't support object fit, for example. So we had to come up with some kind of counter hack for that, for example. So I think officially AMP supports definitely all evergreen browsers, but some of the code snippets that they have are not completely cross-browser.
How about i11?
i11 is okay. It's not too bad. i10, don't look at the site on i10.
Excellent. Anything else? Cool. Oh,
Yeah, so I mean, you see a lot of layout here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, as far as I understand, MState is the idea of MState mostly mobile friendly, and they don't really need the layout.
Well, accelerated mobile pages is AMP, so it's very focused towards mobile. Well, that was one of the things that we were trying to get across with this as well. So the general consensus is AMP's kind of just this thing to make articles for news items appear quickly. But really, this is what you can do. This is a nice layout you can do in AMP. There's no reason you can't do that. It's just people don't currently do it.
Nice.
So yeah, it was an exercise in sort of showing off what you can really do now.
Like, is there like an alternative standard to AMP, which is like open and also like in the company? As one of the WFBC is actually working on something.
Yeah, like there's competing standards already. So there's Facebook's instant pages, which is a competing standard, even though that's siloed in Facebook. This is Google initiative, so it's a little bit more open. There's a standards base in there and stuff. I don't know about the W3C standard for it, but I'm sure it will.
Is there always going to be a problem though, because of one of the speed things is surely cache, and if through the CDN, it's like whoever controls the best CDN. Which presumably Google has got that one.
So
it would have to be someone who's like open, who's willing to have a CDN be used by everyone.
I suppose there's an issue straight away there. It's a central control.
Yeah, I think they're trying to do something about it. But yeah, definitely. So what is really interesting to me is that you may look at this website and just say, okay, it's a nice website. But then if you think about the technology it's been built with, and if you look at an average website built with AMP, this is really impressive. And there's a new kind of wave of templates that are trying to make the same point, that basically with AMP you can actually build a website that looks like a website coded in 2017 with modern web features, which is responsive and loads very fast and is fancy in a way.
Cool. Right, so we're going to have a quick break. So if you want to grab another drink, toilets at the back down the stairs. We're going to have sort of 10 minutes, and then we've got one more talk, and then we can head over to the pub, over at the Crown. But other than that, Marcos, thank you very much. Thank you. So we're going to move over to our final talk of the night. We've got Dominic Santos. He's the full stack dev over at Toaster. He does a lot of back end, but weirdly he's talking about front end stuff. Yeah, he loves it all.
Wait.
He loves it all, really. So yeah, we're a Polymer. We used to be a Polymer Meetup, and we've set people there, but old habits die hard. So one of the big things recently with Polymer has been Polymer 2, and that leaves open the issues of migration paths and all that good fun stuff. And spoiler alert, it's way better than Angular's migration path. So without further ado, can I give a hand for Dom?
So hi, I'm Dom, and as you've guessed, this is a talk about migrating from Polymer 1 to 2. I'll start off with a bit of an introduction, just in case anyone doesn't know what some of this is about. So Polymer initially released like a few years ago, back when web components were just getting started off. It was a thing, it was originally like a Xtag library by Mozilla, but it was basically just a whole load of polyfills because it was trying to push standards at the time for things just weren't supported. So this is kind of what web components look like when you use them in a browser. And it's basically about just as if you can like imagine a Google Maps component, and you'd be able to use it similar to just how you use a H1 or an article or anything like that. So it's just about making it just like really, web components are a set of web platform APIs that allow you to create new, custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML tags. So just that, like you just be able to import a tag and just use it, except it does way more than just a normal tag. So Polymer, originally, like if you're using like 0. whatever, it looks completely different to this, so I'll just start off with 1.x. Basically, a light wrapper framework around a lot of the initial web components v0 spec, back before it wasn't really fully supported, providing stuff like normal framework stuff like data binding, nice UI library, and like just a cohesive set of polyfills that just like mean you don't have to worry about the browsers that don't support it. Some of the specific stuff about web components is something called Shadow DOM, which is basically like the encapsulation of styles and JavaScript inside a hidden bit of DOM. So that or the Google Maps component that you saw previously, if Shadow DOM was enabled on that browser, any style tags you have inside that component would not spill out onto the rest of the page. So you can just use like really open CSS selectors like H1s, make every single one like with a red background, and it will only stay within that component. So it just makes it really easy to just do like reusable components that will not interfere with each other. It also lets you extend like native components. So if you want to make a button, but it has some other kind of like specific padding or a margin or like a weird animation, you can do that, and then anyone can just say, this is a button, but it extends like this super fancy button, and then it just adds new functionality to it. So this is kind of like what Polymer 1 looks like. The bit on the right is like just what goes inside the script tag. This defines a whole component, which then you'd be able to just import and use. This one really doesn't do a lot, but you can see some of the data binding going on here, where you've got like the greeting property defined here and then just being used over there. And the middle bit there where it's got my EL, that's like us using another web component. So you can just, you've got the data binding and you just use it similar to like a normal component. So then about January this year, finally, the Web Components v1 spec came out, which looks a little bit different. It's basically, the two major specs that came from that was the Shadow DOM, the v1 spec, and the Custom Elements v1. So if a browser has both of those, then it fully supports Web Components, and you don't even need to use a framework like Polymer. You can just do it all in like native ES6. Basically, if the browser support that, they have to support a load of ES6 features. So you've got an ES6 element here, and then you've just got like define it as an element, and then after that you can immediately just use my element in any of the browsers that it supports, which at the moment are Chrome and Safari, and then you kind of have to polyfill the rest. Firefox is in development, and Edge is like it's on their roadmap. So for now, Edge is the most polyfilled one. Bit of a surprise there. Yeah. So Polymer 2, which recently came out, We've got the old Polymer 1 stuff here, we've got the new Polymer 2 stuff here. Tries to conform as much as possible with the new spec, with the new standard. Let's see, they've been the ones pushing all the new standard. They keep using this hashtag, like hashtag use the platform. So they just want things to be as close as possible to whatever the standard is, and they try to do as light a wrapper as possible around that. Smiley face doesn't really turn out good. The main stuff about Polymer 2 that they're pushing at the moment is interoperability. So previously, Polymer had like these magic like polymer.dom selector that works a lot like jQuery for like hiding a lot of the underlying browser implementation from you. So they've removed that to try and make it as compatible as possible with just the standards as much as they can. And also now you get to use all the fancy ES6 stuff. So you got like the classes, you got getters and setters, you've got let and const, which are like new variable declarations for scoping them in specific ways or making them immutable. And you've got arrow functions, which I think are really, really cool, save you a lot of time. And also in the new Polymer stuff, Polymer 2 stuff, they've got a lot more specific documentation around like very niche behavior of the framework, which previously was just like, if you wanted to learn about it, you just have to go into the source code and read about it, and read the actual source code and try and figure it out, because it wasn't documented. So if you're doing really fancy stuff, then you'd need to just figure it out by yourself. Also, you've got batched data changes, which is just one that I kind of like. So previously, if you wanted to set a property, you'd have to do this.set key value in order for like the data binding to work. Now you can just set a whole load of them at once. That might sound like a really basic feature, but you just couldn't do it all in 1.x, and now you do. That is supposed to be an unhappy smiley face in the top left there, by the way. So previously, in Polymer 1.x, you could just do the bit at the top, which is basically binding an event handler. Pretty basic stuff, I think. And one thing that I don't like is that they've removed that. Basically, they're trying to make you use just the platform. So you can see here we're using, so connected callback, for example, is a specific callback that custom elements will get called when they get put into the DOM. This is the spec as it stands. This is how the browser is supposed to implement it. But it's a bit tedious to use that. So for this specific example, I ended up writing my own like mix-in that I use because I just prefer doing it the old way. Like the new way is good. They want you to just use that, and you could just use it on any browser. It's a bit tedious, I find. What else? It's because of that kind of use the platform stuff, I did find other stuff that was also quite a little bit tedious. So on the left-hand side, just in general, those kind of callbacks and some of the other ones, because there's a whole host of them that are spec'd out, are a little bit annoying to write all the time. So like for some other stuff as well, I ended up just writing my own mix-ins specifically because I just wanted to like write it in my own syntax, and it would just be easier to do that. And then on the right-hand side is a super niche one. Basically, I do a lot of React programming and Polymer. And in that, if you use like Babel or Browserify or anything like that, you can just use all the super cutting-edge features from like TC39, which is like the standards body that defines all the new behavior coming to ES6 and so forth, and ES7. So this is really like me just complaining about it. But the second one is what I'd like to write, and the first one is what I have to write. And I got really annoyed by having to do that. It's pretty similar. You're saving a few keystrokes there, but it's stuff that is really close to coming to the platform, but it's still like they decided not to include that. So within Polymer 2, because you're writing in all this ES6 stuff, depending on what browsers you want to target, then Babel comes pre-configured inside the build tools for it, so that it gets turned into ES5 to support basically every old browser. So you could just have it in and just transpiled, but they decided against that. So some of the pain points that I specifically had around upgrading Polymer 1.x I think it was a 1.4 project at the time, was some of the styling stuff. So all that scoped styling that I spoke about, there's some magic that Polymer has implemented, such as host, which basically applies to the whole element, and slotted, which is for when you want to include content inside your component. If anyone's used Angular 1, it's basically called like transclusion inside there. It's basically if you want to include if you have like a button element and you define some text inside it, you have access to that text via the slotted stuff. What else? And also in Polymer 2.0, they've changed the way that like initialization works for observers. So you can have like property observers on your element that observe any other property that you want and will do something when that changes. And previously, they would only get triggered when a value gets set, whereas now they might get triggered with undefined values if it's right at the start. So if you've got components that are relying inadvertently on that behavior from the old Polymer 1.x, then you'll get subtle issues and bugs and things being like, oh, undefined, I don't know why this is happening. And then that's a heart face, because basically, I guess the best part is that because it's so modular, you can just add in like little mix-ins and stuff like that yourself and just do whatever you want. Because you're dealing with ES6 classes, it's really easy to just make it behave almost any way that you like. And you have actually got access to like all the old APIs from 1.x if you want. So it's really easy to bring back certain behavior that you had previously, such as the Polymer DOM stuff that I mentioned earlier, which is basically a jQuery selector, or some of the old mix-in behavior, because you used to define mix-ins in a slightly different way. And if you basically just want to work as if Polymer 2 kind of doesn't exist, you can just use that magic mix-in at the bottom, Polymer.legacy element mix-in, which comes pre-built in Polymer 2, and it lets you use a load of the old like APIs exactly as they were. So if you really don't like the 2.0 stuff, you can still use a load of the old stuff, which is cool. And then some of the really niche stuff as well is if you're doing certain dynamic programming, such as those properties before, like if you want to dynamically define them and dynamically do certain stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, the documentation now for that is really good, and they've actually said, hey, here are these very niche APIs. If you want to use them, this is how you use them, and it's fully supported. Whereas previously, if you want to do that stuff, and I had tried, you end up with all kinds of weird bugs, because you're basically just looking at the internals of the framework and trying to do stuff with it that they don't think you should do. And that's it.
Go.
Oh.
Love a good technical talk.
Yeah, very technical.
So, all that seemed... Sam, I've got a question.
Yeah.
All that seemed vaguely negative towards Polymer 2.
Okay.
But I'm totally on board with what they're trying to do. It's like forcing you down to use proper JavaScript. It's not like you have to learn Polymer, you know it already because you know JavaScript and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So do you think it's more like, do you prefer the old way of Polymer 1 or?
I liked some parts of it, but that's why I tried to end on the modular stuff, because that is the best thing that I like about it. Because it's so modular, and because you get the ES6 stuff, it just makes it really nice to work with. And it's good that they basically, the reason they've had to change a load of this stuff is because of the V1 spec, which means you're now getting non-polyfill performance for all that stuff.
Oh, okay.
So because it's the V1 spec, it means the browsers are building that. It's like it's properly like the W3C and all that. They're saying this is what we're going to build. This is what the browser should support. So like I said, IE and Firefox will have it native soon. Like it's either on the roadmap or in development. So I think that's the best reason to use it. That and the modularity, all that ES6 stuff, the const, the let, the getters, etc.
Do you find you're writing a lot of like just little utility functions in Polymer 2?
Yes, so I've already written to myself just because I liked some of the old behavior. Like the main one for me was that listeners, because that's a thing I think you do all the time, and it's just a bit tedious to have to keep track of the handler yourself and detach it afterwards. Yeah.
So say I've got massive Polymer 1 website.
Yep.
It's a massive app I've been using. It's been up there for a year, and then I'm like, I could really
do with
upgrading, all this performance boost.
Yeah.
What should I do? Throw it all out and start again, or?
You can definitely upgrade it. Like the compatibility, basically the way that Polymer 2 works is it's designed to be fully compatible with old style Polymer. So if you go back to like 1.7, it should be okay, because already at that point you're getting like deprecation warnings and stuff like that. Okay. So it should be absolutely fine. If you go back further, which is what I had like 1.4, which is about a year ago or a little bit more than that, then all I had to do really was tweak some style tags, that's it, and then it kind of just worked. There's a specific polyfill that you need to include for ES5 stuff, but they've got a really good like feature detection polyfill loader. I think it's just called Web Component Loader, Web Component Lite, or something like that, and it will just automatically detect what you need to load and just make it work. So really, it is really easy to upgrade, and there's probably very little reason why you should hold off. Like if you're still working on it and you're going to carry on working on it, it's pretty easy.
So documentation wise, where's the first place you'd go to look at Polymer 2? So
I mean, I googled Polymer 2, and then it goes straight to the upgrade guide. They've got a massive upgrade guide on there saying about, here are all the old stuff you might be doing, here's the new stuff for how you should do it. It's really well documented. Like that's, I think, one of the best parts. It was already quite well documented before, but even now they've explicitly said, here's all the old behavior, here's how it's changed, here's what you should do in the meantime. So it's like, it's really, really good, I think.
Nice one. All right, so we've got time for some questions. We've also got time for questions from any of the talks as well. So anything from Johnny's slit scanner, anything from Marco's AMP that we didn't quite get through, or anything to do with Polymer 2. So have you got any questions at all? Yes, Marco. Do you have a question about AMP?
Have you tried the hybrid mode?
Yes.
Talk about it, but personally, I think I'd rather just completely migrate to Polymer 2. But that's like the way I feel about it. Have you tried it?
Yeah, so I've got like at least 2 applications running in hybrid mode at the moment, and it works fine. Like I said, as long as the old stuff runs on 1.7 about, then it should be absolutely fine. And the other thing is, sometimes I guess you have to run in hybrid mode, because if you use any pre-built components, then unless you want to upgrade them yourself, then you're kind of stuck with using them like that, any third-party stuff. But it fully works. So they've released a load of their catalog of pre-built components to work fully in hybrid mode now, which is great, because then it means you can use them in either Polymer, which is at the moment is like 1.7-ish. I think 1.9 was released recently, or 2.
All of the like paper button and all the material design.
Yeah, it includes most of them. So they've got like this whole UI library, like the paper button, or like they call it paper hyphen something or other, and they all work really well. They all look material. If you like that style, then that's good. If you don't, then you have to change them yourself.
Cool. Anyone else have any questions? Yeah? Well, if there's no other questions about any of the talks, like ideally we're going to get all this online pretty quick. We're going to get all these talks up online quicker, and then a video pretty soon. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming. It's really appreciated, like massively. Thought I was going to be talking to an empty room, but this is awesome. We're going to go over to the Crown for a drink afterwards, which is, you just go out the door, turn right, it's directly over there. So feel free to come across and have a chat. If there's anything else, any other questions you want to ask it directly, that'd be good. But more importantly, like anything you specifically want. So something that you would like to see in our next talk, or if you want to give a talk yourself, anything like that. Are these talks too technical, or they're not technical enough? That kind of feedback would be awesome. So yeah, thank you very much to the speakers. So thanks Marco, Johnny and Dom. Cheers. Thank you for the toaster for sorting everything out, for the pizzas and the beer and the place. And